On the morning of October 14, 1947, a B-29 Superfortress bomber climbed to 25,000 feet over the Mojave Desert in California. In its belly, attached like a parasite to the underside of the fuselage, hung a small, bright orange aircraft shaped like a bullet. Inside that aircraft sat a 24-year-old Air Force captain from Hamlin, West Virginia. His name was Charles Elwood Yeager, and he was flying with 2 broken ribs. The night before, he had fallen off a horse near the base. The ribs cracked on impact. He told almost no one, because if the Air Force found out, they would have grounded him and given the mission to someone else. This was the mission he had been training for, the mission that no one was certain was survivable. At 10:26 that morning, the B-29 released the orange aircraft into the thin desert air. Yeager ignited the rocket engine, and 17 seconds later, he flew faster than the speed of sound. No one had ever done it before. Many had died trying. This is the story of Chuck Yeager, the greatest test pilot who ever lived. The man from West Virginia who broke the sound barrier, and in doing so, opened the door to the modern age of flight.
Another world, sky.
In the years immediately after World War II, aviation was approaching a wall. Not a physical wall, a wall of physics. As aircraft flew faster and faster, approaching the speed of sound, roughly 767 miles per hour at sea level, something strange and terrifying began to happen. The air in front of the aircraft couldn't get out of the way fast enough. It compressed into a shock wave. And that shock wave did things to an aircraft that engineers didn't fully understand and couldn't fully predict. Controls became sluggish, then reversed. Aircraft shook violently. Some broke apart in midair. Others went into uncontrollable dives. Pilots began calling it the sound barrier. And for good reason, it seemed to be exactly that. A barrier beyond which flight was impossible. Several pilots had died attempting to push through it. Geoffrey de Havilland, son of the famous British aircraft designer, had been killed in 1946 when his experimental jet broke apart near the speed of sound over the Thames estuary. Others had survived, barely, after their aircraft shed pieces and they fought for control at speeds their machines were never designed to reach. The consensus among many engineers was grim. The sound barrier might simply be impassable. The physics of air at transonic speeds might make supersonic flight fundamentally impossible for any piloted aircraft. The United States government disagreed. In 1944, the Army Air Forces had contracted with Bell Aircraft to build an experimental plane specifically designed to break the sound barrier. The aircraft would be rocket-powered because a rocket doesn't need air to breathe, and at extreme altitude the air is too thin for a conventional jet engine to function efficiently. The aircraft was called the XS-1, later simply the X-1, and they needed a pilot willing to fly it into the unknown. Charles Elwood Yeager was born on February 13, 1923, in Myra, West Virginia. He grew up in a small town called Hamlin, population just over 1,000. His father was a natural gas driller. His family had no money, no connections, no particular reason to expect that one of their sons would change the course of aviation history. What Chuck Yeager had was reflexes, eyesight, and a natural understanding of mechanical things that couldn't be taught. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1941 at the age of 18, initially as an aircraft mechanic. He had never flown, but he had spent his childhood taking apart and reassembling anything mechanical he could find, and the military recognized that instinct. He applied for flight training and was accepted. From the moment he first got into a cockpit, it was clear he was different. Most pilots could fly an aircraft. Yeager could feel it, the way it responded to control inputs, the way it behaved at different speeds and altitudes, the subtle signals it gave before something went wrong. Instructors noticed. His progression through training was exceptional. He was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group in England in late 1943, flying P-51 Mustangs over occupied Europe. And then came November 20th, 1943. On his 8th combat mission, Yeager's P-51 was shot down over German-occupied France. He bailed out, parachuted into a forest, and found himself behind enemy lines with German forces searching for him. What followed was one of the most remarkable escape stories of World War II. Yeager connected with the French Maquis resistance movement. He spent months moving through rural France, hiding in barns and farmhouses, guided by French civilians who were risking their lives to help him. He crossed the Pyrenees mountains on foot in winter conditions, an extraordinarily dangerous journey, and reached neutral Spain. He was repatriated to England in March 1944. Under normal Air Force policy, pilots who had been aided by resistance networks and then returned to combat could compromise those networks if captured and interrogated again. They were supposed to be sent home. Yeager appealed directly to General Eisenhower. He made his case personally. He wanted to fly again. He was a combat pilot. The war wasn't over. Eisenhower approved the request. Yeager went back into combat. In the weeks that followed, he became an ace, then a double ace. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 German aircraft in a single mission, including one engagement where he shot down a Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, in a propeller-driven P-51. By the end of the war, he had 13 confirmed aerial kills. When the war ended in 1945, Chuck Yeager was 22 years old. He was exactly the kind of pilot the Air Force wanted for its new experimental aircraft program. In 1947, he was assigned to Muroc Army Airfield in the California desert, the facility that would later become Edwards Air Force Base. His job, test pilot. In the aircraft waiting for him, there was the Bell X-1. Muroc Army Airfield in 1947 was the edge of the known world. It sat in the middle of the Mojave Desert, surrounded by nothing, dry lake beds, scrub brush, rattlesnakes, and silence. The nearest town of any size was miles away. The base was deliberately remote because the aircraft being tested there were too secret and too dangerous to fly near populated areas. The Bell X-1 was waiting. It was a strange-looking machine, stubby and bullet-shaped, literally modeled on the shape of a .50 caliber bullet, which engineers knew was stable at supersonic speeds. Painted bright orange so ground crews could spot it if it went down in the desert. Tiny wings, almost absurdly small for an aircraft its size. It held enough rocket fuel for approximately 2.5 minutes of powered flight. That was all. 2.5 minutes to push through the sound barrier, or die trying. The X-1 didn't take off under its own power. It was carried to altitude by a modified B-29 bomber, dropped at 25,000 feet, and then the pilot ignited the rocket engine. The first powered flights were cautious. Yeager and the engineering team pushed the aircraft incrementally faster, Mach 0.85, then 0.9, then 0.92. Each time, the shock waves built and the aircraft shook and the controls became unreliable. At Mach 0.94, the control column locked up completely. For a terrifying moment, Yeager had no pitch control, no way to point the aircraft up or down. The engineering team found a solution, a movable horizontal stabilizer. By adjusting the entire tail surface rather than just the elevator, they could maintain control through the transonic region. It was an engineering insight that would be incorporated into nearly every high-performance aircraft designed afterward. By October 1947, they were ready to push for Mach 1. And then, the night before the scheduled attempt, Chuck Yeager fell off a horse. Before we continue, let's take a closer look at the aircraft that made history on that October morning. The Bell X-1, Glamorous Glennis, named by Chuck Yeager after the woman he loved. The first aircraft to break the sound barrier. Role, supersonic research. Built not for war, not for reconnaissance. Built purely to answer one question. Could a human being fly faster than sound and survive? Top speed, Mach 1.06. That's 700 miles per hour, 1,127 kilometers per hour. Faster than anything that had ever flown. Service ceiling, 71,900 feet, over 13 miles above the Earth. Range, approximately 10 minutes of powered flight. 10 minutes to make history or die trying. Engine, 1 reaction motors XLR, 11 rocket engine. No air intake, no jet turbine, pure rocket power, burning liquid oxygen and alcohol in 4 combustion chambers. Maximum takeoff weight, 13,400 pounds. Remarkably light, almost fragile. In service from 1946 to 1958. First to break the sound barrier. Faster than fear. Now, let's get back to our story. The morning of October 14th, 1947 was clear and cold over the Mojave Desert. Chuck Yeager arrived at the flight line with 2 cracked ribs and a secret. The night before, he and his wife Glennis had gone horseback riding near the base. In the darkness, Yeager's horse had spooked and thrown him. He hit the ground hard. 2 ribs cracked on impact. He drove to a civilian doctor in the nearby town of Rosamond rather than the base hospital, because a base doctor would have been required to file a report, and a report would have grounded him. The civilian doctor taped his ribs, told him to rest. Yeager had no intention of resting. He told only one person at the base, his friend and fellow test pilot Jack Ridley. He needed Ridley's help because with broken ribs, he couldn't reach across the cockpit to seal the hatch of the X-1 with a normal latch handle. Ridley cut off a piece of broomstick and fashioned it into a makeshift lever. With the broomstick, Yeager could reach the latch with one arm, without twisting his injured torso. It was the most important piece of broomstick in aviation history. At 10 o'clock that morning, Yeager was loaded into the X-1, while the B-29 was still on the ground. He crawled through a hatch in the bomb bay and dropped into the cockpit of the orange aircraft hanging in the darkness below. The B-29 took off and climbed to 25,000 feet. At 10:26, the X-1 was released. Yeager fell away from the B-29 and ignited the first of the 4 rocket chambers. The acceleration was unlike anything he had felt before. The X-1 climbed and accelerated simultaneously, burning through its tiny fuel supply at a ferocious rate. He lit the second chamber, then the third. The airspeed indicator climbed past Mach 0.88, then 0.92, then 0.96. The aircraft began to buffet, the familiar shaking that came as the shock waves built around the airframe. The controls became heavy. The nose wanted to pitch. Yeager held it. Mach 0.98, Mach 0.99, and then silence. The buffeting stopped. The controls smoothed out. The shock waves that had been building against the aircraft's skin suddenly swept behind it, and the X-1 flew into air that had never been disturbed before. The Mach meter read 1.06. Chuck Yeager was flying at 700 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound. Faster than any human being had ever traveled in a powered aircraft. On the ground, in the desert below, observers heard a sound they had never heard before. A sonic boom, the shock wave created by the X-1 reaching the ground. A deep, resonant crack that rolled across the Mojave like distant thunder. The sound barrier was broken. The flight lasted 14 minutes from drop to landing. Yeager used the remaining rocket fuel to climb to 45,000 feet, then glided back down to the lake bed at Muroc. He landed, climbed out of the cockpit. His ribs ached. He said almost nothing about what had happened. The flight was classified. He couldn't tell anyone outside the program. He drove home to his wife. Glennis Yeager asked how the flight had gone. He told her it went fine. The breaking of the sound barrier remained classified for months. The Air Force said nothing publicly. The engineering team filed their reports. Yeager continued flying, pushing the X-1 faster and higher in subsequent flights, eventually reaching Mach 1.45 in later tests. It wasn't until June 1948, 8 months after the flight, that the story became public. The reaction was extraordinary. Yeager became, almost overnight, one of the most famous men in America. His face appeared on magazine covers. He was invited to the White House. He received the Collier Trophy, aviation's highest honor, along with the X-1 program team. But Yeager himself was characteristically understated about all of it. He had done his job. He had flown the aircraft the way it was designed to be flown. The engineering team had solved the control problems. He He had simply been the man in the seat. That modesty, genuine, not performed, became one of the defining characteristics of what writer Tom Wolfe would later call the right stuff. The quality that the best test pilots shared. Absolute competence combined with absolute calm. The ability to face death with the same composure you'd bring to a routine task. Yeager flew for decades after October 14, 1947. He flew more than 150 different aircraft types over his career. He flew combat missions again in Vietnam. He continued setting records and pushing envelopes long after most men his age had retired. On October 14, 1997, exactly 50 years after the original flight, Chuck Yeager, then 74 years old, flew an F-15D Eagle past Mach 1 over Edwards Air Force Base. He broke the sound barrier again, for the anniversary, because he could. Chuck Yeager's flight on October 14, 1947 did more than break a record. It broke open the modern age of aviation. Every supersonic aircraft that followed, the F-100 Super Sabre, the SR-71 Blackbird, the Concorde, the F-22 Raptor, exists because of what happened that morning over the Mojave Desert. The engineers who designed them knew it was possible because Yeager had proven it. The pilots who flew them knew the sky had no ceiling because a West Virginia farm boy had flown through the sound barrier with 2 broken ribs and a piece of broomstick. The movable horizontal stabilizer that Jack Ridley and the engineering team developed to solve the control problem at transonic speeds became standard on virtually every high-performance aircraft designed afterward. It is in the tail of every modern fighter jet. An engineering solution born from a specific problem on a specific morning in 1947, still flying today. And there is the matter of what Yeager represented beyond aviation. He was not a product of the elite. He had no university degree, no family connections, no privileged background. He was a working-class kid from rural West Virginia who could fly better than anyone alive, and who, when the moment came, got on a horse the night before the most important flight of his life and broke 2 ribs. And flew anyway. Tom Wolfe captured it best in his 1979 book, The Right Stuff, a chronicle of the test pilots at Muroc and the early astronauts of the Mercury program. Wolfe argued that Yeager represented a particular kind of American excellence, practical, unassuming, technically brilliant, and utterly without pretension. The right stuff, not the loudest, not the most celebrated, the most capable. Chuck Yeager retired from the Air Force as a brigadier general in 1975. He remained active as a consultant and ambassador for aviation for decades afterward. He died on December 7, 2020, at the age of 97, Pearl Harbor Day. His wife, Victoria, announced his death in a message on his Twitter account. The response was immediate and global. From Air Force pilots to aerospace engineers to ordinary people who had grown up hearing his name, the tributes poured in for days. President Donald Trump called him a great American hero. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Yeager had set the bar for all who dare to fly. The flag at Edwards Air Force Base, the base that had been built on the dry lake bed where he had first broken the sound barrier, was flown at half-staff. On October 14, 1947, a young man from West Virginia climbed into a bright orange rocket plane with 2 broken ribs, a piece of broomstick, and the absolute conviction that the sound barrier could be broken. He was right. What followed changed aviation, changed warfare, changed the very idea of what was possible in the sky. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Chuck Yeager is not the sound barrier. It is what came before it and what came after. The combat missions over Germany, the escape through the Pyrenees, the return to combat when regulations said he should go home, the 50 years of flying that followed, the most famous 14 minutes in aviation history. A life lived entirely at the edge of what was possible. Some people are born for exactly one thing. Chuck Yeager was born to fly. If you'd like to support this project, the link is in the description below. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We'll see you on the next flight.